Anger is rarely born in the moment something happens. It is born in the moment something fails to meet an expectation you quietly carried. Long before the reaction shows up, the mind has already written a script for how people should behave, speak, respond, or treat you. When reality refuses to follow that script, the emotional system interprets it as a violation rather than a difference. What feels like anger toward a person is often disappointment toward an expectation that was never communicated or agreed upon. Most expectations operate subconsciously, which is why anger feels sudden and justified. You assume respect should be automatic, consideration should be mutual, and understanding should be effortless. These assumptions feel reasonable because they reflect how you would act in the same situation. But assuming others share your values, awareness, or emotional intelligence sets a trap for frustration. The gap between how you think people should act and how they actually act is where anger quietly grows. When expectations are unexamined, they turn into emotional debt. You believe others owe you courtesy, loyalty, recognition, or appreciation, and when payment doesn't arrive, you feel cheated. The mind frames this as mistreatment, but in reality, it is a collision between internal demands and external reality. The anger is not proof that someone wronged you. It is evidence that you demanded something from them without securing agreement. Expectations also amplify minor events into major emotional disruptions. A delayed response, a dismissive tone, or a forgotten commitment would barely register if no expectation existed. But when the mind has already decided how things should go, even small deviations feel like disrespect. The reaction becomes disproportionate, not because the action was severe, but because the expectation was rigid. Many people mistake expectations for standards, but they are not the same. Standards govern your behavior. Expectations attempt to govern others. Standards are empowering because they are self-directed, while expectations create dependency because they rely on external compliance. Anger increases when you confuse the two and try to enforce internal rules onto people who never agreed to live by them. Expectations often come from past experiences, upbringing, and personal values, yet they are projected outward as universal rules. What feels obvious and normal to you may be foreign or irrelevant to someone else. When you assume shared understanding without verification, you build emotional reactions on unstable ground. The disappointment that follows is predictable, even if it feels unfair. Another source of anger is the belief that good intentions should guarantee good treatment. When you show kindness, effort, or loyalty, the mind expects symmetry. But life does not operate on emotional accounting. People respond based on their capacity, not your contribution. When you expect reciprocity, instead of recognizing differences in awareness and ability, frustration becomes inevitable. Anger intensifies when expectations are tied to identity and self-worth. When someone fails to meet your expectations, it can feel like a personal rejection rather than a neutral outcome. The ego interprets unmet expectations as disrespect or devaluation, even when no such message was intended. This misinterpretation turns ordinary human behavior into perceived attacks. Letting go of expectations does not mean tolerating poor behavior or lowering standards. It means releasing the demand that others must act a certain way for you to remain at peace. When expectations loosen, emotional reactions soften. You gain the ability to observe behavior without immediately attaching meaning, motive, or judgment. As expectations dissolve, anger loses its fuel. What remains is clarity, choice, and emotional space to respond rather than react. You begin to see people as they are instead of as you wish they would be, and the emotional charge attached to their actions fades into neutrality. Emotional control is not about suppressing feelings or pretending they do not exist. It is about deciding who gets access to your inner world. The moment your emotions are triggered by external events or other people, authority shifts away from you. Power is never lost through force alone. It is surrendered through uncontrolled reactions. When you regulate your emotional responses, you reclaim ownership of your state of mind. Every reaction is a signal of influence. If someone's words can disturb your peace, they have leverage over you whether they realize it or not. Emotional control removes that leverage. It creates a separation between stimulus and response, a space where choice replaces impulse. That space is where strength lives, because power is the ability to choose your response instead of being driven by habit or emotion. People often confuse emotional control with emotional weakness, but the opposite is true. Losing control in anger, frustration, or insecurity is easy and common. Remaining composed when challenged requires discipline and awareness. Calmness under pressure communicates confidence, stability, and authority without the need for explanation or defense. When emotions dominate decision-making, logic becomes distorted. Anger pushes people to say things they cannot take back and make choices that create long-term consequences from short-term feelings. Emotional control protects you from sabotaging your future to satisfy a temporary emotional surge. It allows you to act in alignment with long-term goals rather than momentary reactions. Personal power grows as emotional independence increases. When your mood no longer depends on praise, approval, or external validation, you become self-governed. You stop negotiating your peace for acceptance. This independence shifts how people interact with you, because those who cannot control themselves are instinctively influenced by those who can. Emotional control also sharpens perception. Instead of being clouded by reaction, you see situations more clearly. You notice patterns, intentions, and opportunities that emotional chaos would have hidden. This clarity allows you to respond strategically rather than emotionally, turning challenges into advantages rather than conflicts. The ability to stay composed in adversity builds inner authority. When others panic, complain, or react impulsively, your steadiness becomes a reference point. People trust those who demonstrate control over themselves because self-mastery signals reliability. Leadership often emerges not from loudness or dominance, but from calm certainty. As emotional control strengthens, resilience increases. Disappointment, criticism, and setbacks lose their power to destabilize you. You feel the emotion without being consumed by it. This resilience allows you to recover faster, adapt quicker, and maintain forward momentum, even when circumstances are unfavorable. Control over emotions transforms how you experience opposition. Instead of feeling threatened, you remain curious. Instead of reacting defensively, you listen and assess. This shift turns conflict into information and resistance into feedback, reducing emotional wear and increasing strategic advantage. When you master your emotional responses, you master your direction. Your energy is no longer wasted on unnecessary battles or reactive behavior. Power becomes internal, consistent, and self-sustaining, independent of circumstances, people, or outcomes. Purpose gives the mind a direction, and direction reduces sensitivity to noise. When you know exactly what you are building, random opinions, minor setbacks, and emotional triggers lose their ability to derail you. Distractions gain power only in the absence of clarity. A clear purpose acts like a filter, allowing only what aligns with your mission to enter your emotional space. Emotional distraction thrives when energy has no assigned destination. Without purpose, attention wanders and reacts to everything that demands notice. Every comment feels personal, every obstacle feels heavy, and every delay feels offensive. Purpose anchors attention, giving emotions somewhere productive to go instead of allowing them to scatter across meaningless reactions. When purpose is strong, reactions become selective. You stop responding to every provocation because not everything deserves access to your focus. Emotional discipline naturally increases because your mind is occupied with progress rather than defense. The more invested you are in meaningful work, the less emotional capacity you have for unnecessary conflict. Purpose reframes adversity. What once felt like a personal attack becomes a logistical problem to solve. Resistance is no longer interpreted as rejection, but as part of the process. This shift reduces emotional volatility because challenges are evaluated based on usefulness rather than offense. Purpose turns emotion into fuel instead of friction. People without purpose often look for emotional stimulation to feel alive. Drama, arguments, and validation become substitutes for direction. When purpose is present, emotional drama feels expensive and inefficient. You begin to guard your emotional energy because you recognize its role in execution and consistency. A strong sense of poo minimizes comparison. When your path is defined, other people's progress does not threaten you. Envy and insecurity fade because your attention is on alignment, not competition. Emotional distraction loses its grip when comparison no longer determines self-worth. Purpose also reduces the need to be understood. When the mission is clear, misunderstanding from others becomes irrelevant. You are no longer emotionally invested in explaining yourself to those who are not aligned with your direction. This detachment protects emotional stability and preserves momentum. As purpose deepens, patience increases. You become less reactive to delays because you understand timing is part of growth. Emotional outbursts often come from urgency without clarity. Purpose replaces urgency with intention, allowing progress without emotional exhaustion. Purpose organizes priorities. When everything is not equally important, emotional responses become measured. You respond based on relevance, not intensity. This organization reduces overwhelm and prevents emotional energy from being spent on low-impact situations. With purpose guiding behavior, emotions fall into alignment rather than chaos. Focus sharpens, distractions fade, and reactions slow down as attention stays locked on what truly matters, leaving little room for emotional interference. The need for validation places your emotional stability in the hands of people who may not understand you, value you, or even be aware of the power they hold. When approval becomes a requirement rather than a preference, self-worth becomes conditional. Your confidence rises and falls based on reactions you cannot control, creating a fragile emotional foundation that is easily shaken. Validation dependency shifts the source of identity outward. Instead of being anchored in internal values and principles, identity becomes a reflection of how others respond. Praise feels like permission to continue, while criticism feels like a command to stop. This external orientation weakens decision-making because choices are filtered through acceptance rather than alignment. When validation is required, honesty becomes risky. You begin to shape your words, actions, and beliefs to maintain approval. Authentic expression is sacrificed for emotional safety. Over time, this creates internal conflict as the person you present to the world drifts further from who you actually are. Dependency on validation also increases emotional reactivity. A single negative comment can outweigh dozens of positive ones because it threatens belonging. The mind scans for rejection, amplifying sensitivity and anxiety. This constant vigilance drains emotional energy and keeps attention locked on external feedback instead of internal growth. People who sense validation dependency may consciously or unconsciously exploit it. Approval becomes a tool for influence, and withdrawal becomes a form of control. When your emotional well-being depends on being liked, manipulation becomes easy and resistance becomes difficult. Validation dependency distorts self-assessment. Progress is measured by applause instead of improvement, and value is determined by visibility rather than substance. This distortion leads to shallow goals and inconsistent effort as motivation depends on recognition rather than purpose. The absence of validation often feels like failure to those who depend on it. Silence is interpreted as rejection, and neutrality feels like disapproval. This misinterpretation creates unnecessary emotional pain and reinforces the belief that worth must be constantly proven. As dependency deepens, boundaries weaken. Saying no becomes difficult because disapproval feels threatening. Personal limits are crossed to preserve acceptance, slowly eroding self-respect. The desire to be liked begins to override the need to be whole. Breaking validation dependency requires shifting approval inward. When self-respect becomes the standard, external opinions lose their power to define. Feedback can be received without becoming identity, and disagreement no longer feels like danger. True confidence emerges when approval is optional rather than essential. Emotional strength grows as self-worth stabilizes internally, reducing vulnerability and restoring autonomy to the individual who no longer needs permission to exist as they are. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness because it lacks immediate visibility, yet it requires far more control than impulsive expression. The ability to hold back a reaction when emotions are stirred demonstrates discipline and awareness. Where others rush to speak, justify, or defend, restraint preserves clarity and prevents unnecessary exposure. Every response reveals information. When you speak too quickly, you give away emotional position, intention, and insecurity. Silence withholds that information, forcing others to reveal themselves instead. This asymmetry creates leverage, allowing you to observe without committing, assess without escalating, and maintain advantage without confrontation. Restraint protects energy. Arguments, explanations, and emotional exchanges drain focus and momentum. Silence conserves mental resources by refusing to engage in low-return interactions. By choosing not to respond, you avoid being pulled into emotional currents that offer no progress or resolution. Silence also disrupts expectation. Many provocations are designed to trigger reaction, validation, or control. When no response comes, the strategy collapses. The absence of engagement removes the reward, often neutralizing the behavior without effort or confrontation. Restraint sharpens timing. Instead of reacting immediately, you create space for perspective. Time reveals patterns, intentions, and consequences that emotion would have obscured. Delayed response often leads to better decisions, stronger positioning, and outcomes guided by strategy rather than impulse. Silence communicates confidence. When you do not feel the need to explain yourself, defend every choice, or correct every misunderstanding, it signals inner certainty. People tend to challenge those who appear uncertain, but they hesitate with those who remain composed and unmoved. Restraint prevents escalation. Many conflicts grow not because of the original issue, but because of emotional responses layered on top of it. Silence interrupts this chain, stopping minor situations from becoming major problems. Calm non-engagement often dissolves tension faster than confrontation. Strategic silence also encourages respect. When words are used sparingly, they carry more weight. Over-explanation dilutes authority, while measured speech strengthens it. People listen more carefully when they know you do not speak without intention. Silence allows alignment with long-term goals. Emotional reactions tend to serve short-term relief rather than long-term outcomes. By restraining immediate expression, you ensure actions remain aligned with purpose instead of momentary emotion. Through silence and restraint, control remains internal rather than reactive. Power stays centered, decisions remain deliberate, and influence increases without the need for volume, force, or emotional display. Self-mastery begins with awareness, the ability to observe your thoughts, emotions, and impulses without immediately obeying them. Most people live reactively, driven by habits they never questioned and emotions they never examined. Awareness creates separation between who you are and what you feel. And that separation is the first experience of freedom. Without self-mastery, freedom is an illusion. You may have options, resources, or independence, yet still be controlled by fear, anger, insecurity, or desire. External liberty means little when internal forces dictate behavior. True freedom emerges when internal states no longer command automatic obedience. Self-mastery replaces impulse with intention. Instead of acting on the strongest emotion in the moment, you act on principle and direction. This shift transforms behavior from reactive to deliberate. Decisions become consistent rather than emotional, producing outcomes that align with long-term vision instead of short-term relief. Mastery of self reduces dependency on circumstances. When peace, confidence, and focus come from within, external conditions lose their power to disturb. Success no longer creates arrogance, and failure no longer creates collapse. Emotional balance becomes steady rather than conditional. As self-mastery develops, discipline strengthens. Discipline is not restriction, but alignment. You begin to do what needs to be done regardless of mood. This reliability builds self-trust, and self-trust becomes the foundation of confidence that does not require reinforcement from others. Self-mastery also clarifies identity. When behavior aligns with values, inner conflict dissolves. You no longer negotiate with yourself or rationalize inconsistency. This clarity reduces mental noise and emotional friction, allowing energy to flow toward creation rather than self-correction. Control over internal dialogue is a defining element of freedom. The ability to challenge negative thoughts, resist limiting narratives, and redirect attention determines emotional experience. When you guide your thinking, you guide your reality from the inside out. Self-mastery increases resilience. Pressure no longer breaks you because reactio. Answer regulated. Stress becomes manageable, setbacks become instructional, and adversity becomes shaping rather than damaging. The capacity to remain centered in difficulty expands endurance and adaptability. As mastery deepens, influence grows naturally. People respond to those who govern themselves because self-control signals stability and strength. Leadership emerges not from dominance, but from consistency and composure under pressure through self-mastery. Freedom becomes permanent rather than situational. You move without internal resistance, choose without fear, and act without regret, living directed by intention instead of impulse.